Hello. Well, hello there and welcome to day 25 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And I have just seen Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. I'm going to just jump straight into it. So, there is something quite remarkable about this sort of new wave of storytelling. Denzel Washington produced this, and he has really started to, as phenomenal an actor as he is, the kinds of projects he's been producing have been really bringing something to the cinematic landscape in terms of African American storytelling and culture. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is full of atmosphere and energy and colour and sound, basically. I suppose the best place for me to begin is by telling you that my fiancée and I bonded before we got together. First bonded over our mutual interest in New Orleans. And the thing that really drew me and the thing that I think really connected us was the fact that there was something mesmeric about sort of the music and the culture and the style. And as much as that is a fictionalized version that I've sort of created in my mind, that fantasy version of New Orleans is something that I've always wanted to see and to taste and to smell and to hear. And we really bonded over that initially. And that's exactly what I got going into this film. When you first arrive, the camera immediately, you feel like a character practically running in to the club to hear Ma Rainey. You see sort of characters around outdoors, and you can just feel the camera bringing itself in, and all of a sudden you get this explosion of colour, of smoke, and of Ma Rainey's voice ringing through. And it's just so atmospheric that it's such a strong start to a film. As I say, there is this sort of, I'd say, new trend, and I'm wrong in that respect, because the trend that I'm thinking of really is sort of comes from the African American theatrical tradition that has now come to cinema. And I chart that back, as far as I'm aware, that goes back to Spike Lee with Do the Right Thing, which is one of my favourite films, because it has this Greek tragedy structure to it. When you watch Do the Right Thing, you feel like you're watching a classic play, like, a Sophocles play, or but transplanted to Black America. And that was in 1989. So we've had this sort of culture for 30 years. But recently, it's really made, as far as I can see, a resurgence. I saw it with, again, a Denzel Washington produced project with Fences. I remember it with Detroit. But what Ma Rainey's Black Bottom really does is have a sense of musical to it. For all intents and purposes, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is practically a musical, insofar as Ma Rainey was a real person, just to sort of, establish that. She was a real historical character, and you really get a sense of her music and her style, and not just her style, but the style of that time period in terms of blues. And it is a blues musical, even when there's, there aren't that many songs that you see performed, but even when music is not being performed, you get that sense of blues to it. That's intercut with these passages of, after the initial explosion of the club scene, you then cut to a recording session, and the majority of the film takes place in this centralised location during this recording session, and it feels like you're on stage. you go from these very theatric style conversations between, like, there's a long stretch of the film where you don't even see Ma Rainey, where it's interactions between her band, and there's a good, very characterful dialogue between several of the characters who are, the band members who are interacting, and the writing on it is so strong. There's a real sense of, like, back and forth and chemistry, and even though sort of there's this sort of jipes and banter between the characters, you get the sense that, there's a lot of subtext going on. I did a proto video before I started this, a film a day, probably charting back to somewhere towards the end of last year, which was sort of an experiment that led to me wanting to make this series. And that one specifically, I used The Five Bloods, the most recent Spike Lee film. And the reason I chose that was partially because I'm a massive Spike Lee fan, but also because Chadwick Boseman's performance was hailed, and it was one of Chadwick Boseman's last performances before he passed in August last year. And that is a very experimental version of it. It's filmed probably a little better with a professional setup, but it's a good long video, and that's why I've never put it up, although a day may come when I end up putting it when I can't actually get a film in. But Chadwick Boseman brings something to that performance, but that pales in comparison to his final on-screen performance in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. The character he plays, which is Levy, who is this who is part of the band, but he's sort of trying to strike out on his own, and so he's sort of trying to push the future of sort of the band and music, and represents sort of a younger person trying to, like, venture forward, but there's also aggression and anger, and there is a dark backstory to his character that really informs the decisions he makes, and the reason he rubs up against people, and the reason that he has these sort of interactions with people. And Chadwick Boseman gives that performance so much layer and texture. I mean, I said to Helen, he looks so young, and of course, she pointed out that, of course, at that time his health would have been quite bad then, and it would have made him look thinner, which of course would have made him look younger. But there was this sense, I don't know if he chose to use that, because he feels like a decade younger man than he would have been, and especially with how ill he was at that point, he really gives a sense of performance to it. You could almost say Ma Rainey is, of course, this sort of overarching figure, but Levy is kind of your main character, in terms of he probably has more screen time, and you get more of a sense of where he comes from and where he goes in the narrative than any other character. But insofar as, Ma Rainey is almost this, like, I don't know, she's a presence without being there. And when she finally turns up, and again, I mentioned with Widows, that Viola Davis just brings this force. And with Ma Rainey, this character who we see when we first go into the club, we see this character, and she fills the space with her presence. And when you finally meet her in person, as it were, not on stage, when she's, she is full of presence and force, and she is this sort of diva-esque character who's constantly, pushing against people and has this aggression to her, but it's all planned. And the difference, there's a real sense of difference between Ma Rainey's character and Levy's character, in terms of he's very much instinct, and he thinks he's doing things right, but he doesn't realise he's just reacting. Whereas Ma Rainey is all about control, and the heart of the film is about control and who has it and who doesn't. This film is so full of subtext in terms of race and gender and sexuality. Ma Rainey being this black queer woman, again, a real person from history, and that's remarkable, that this person with so much to her and someone who has such contemporary relevance existed, was who she was back then, and that is just wonderful. As I say, it goes from dialogue scenes to monologues to songs, and it's just so rich and layered, and it's just a fantastic film. Like, it is sincerely a fantastic film. It is Chadwick Boseman. It is a fantastic way, as sad and unfortunate as it is to lose him, and the fact that we don't get more from him. This performance is something that, I hope he was proud of, because this was something to leave people with. And Viola Davis, this is, again, every time I see a Viola Davis performance, it's practically career best. But, again, this might be career best. I'm sure there were other things I wanted to say, but coming out of this film, I'm just full of energy and vitality, and so we're on day 25 of this experiment, and I can say without a shadow of a doubt, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is currently the best film I've seen in 2021, head and shoulders. Yesterday we talked about Mank and the fact that is obviously sort of conversations being had about whether that's going to immediately kind of get slipped into the Academy Awards. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, I want to see that. That's what I want to see acknowledged, because, I mean, we're in January. Who knows what this year will look like, and especially in cinema because of how weird it is. But, I will struggle to think. I do not believe I will see 5 films this year as good as Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Whew. So, thank you for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow. Take care.